No one expected the world's most famous violinist to stop mid-performance and laugh at a woman in the crowd. But that's exactly what happened on the night of the gala for the arts, held in one of New York's most luxurious concert halls. The seats were filled with the elite, millionaires, celebrities, and art connoisseurs dressed in silk and diamonds. Julian Crane, the genius behind the $1 Million Bow, stood under golden lights, his name whispered with awe. They called him the maestro of fortune. His violin, an antique worth more than most people's homes, had been gifted to him by a billionaire patron. That night, he played flawlessly until he noticed her. She sat alone in the third row. No pearls, no designer gown. Her shoes were scuffed, her coat worn at the edges. She didn't belong there, and Julian made sure everyone saw that. Mid-performance, he paused, squinted at her, then chuckled into the mic. "Seems like we've let charity take over the front rows," he said, making the audience laugh. The woman didn't move. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable, like she was made of stone. What no one knew was that this quiet, simple woman held a secret, one that would shake Julian's $1 million ego to its core. But at that moment, she remained silent, until a single tear slid down her cheek. The laughter slowly faded as discomfort rippled through the room. Julian continued, brushing it off. To him, she was just a momentary distraction, but she would become the moment that changed everything. Who was she, and why didn't she leave? Backstage, whispers began. Some said she was homeless. Others guessed she had snuck in. But one old janitor, who'd worked at the hall for years, simply muttered, "That woman, she used to play." When someone asked what he meant, he only replied, "You'll see." The next morning, the internet exploded. A clip of Julian mocking the woman had gone viral. The rich loved him, but the rest of the world? Outrage poured in. Arrogant, cruel, heartless. Headlines flamed his reputation. Still, Julian didn't care. He believed wealth gave him power, that his fame shielded him from consequences. He was a man who had bathed in applause since he was 10, whose hands had been kissed by royalty. He thought no one could touch him, until a challenge arrived, in the form of an old violin. 2 days later, the concert hall announced a surprise. A small, free recital open to the public. Julian scoffed. "Let them in," he said. "Let them hear what real talent sounds like." But something felt strange. The stage wasn't set for him. In fact, it wasn't even his recital. The woman returned. This time, she walked down the center aisle. No security stopped her. No staff questioned her. And when she stepped onto the stage, carrying nothing but an old, worn-out violin case, every eye turned. What was she doing? Julian, standing at the back of the hall, crossed his arms. "This should be amusing," he whispered. But when she opened the case and drew the bow across the strings, silence fell. The first note sent a shiver through the room. Who was this woman? And why did her music feel like it had lived 1,000 lives? The sound that came from her violin wasn't polished like Julian's. It wasn't rehearsed for perfection or meant to impress the wealthy elite. It was raw, aching, and alive. The moment her fingers touched the strings, it was as if the air itself paused to listen. Every note told a story of loss, of love, of years forgotten, and talent buried beneath silence. The crowd leaned in, breathless, caught in a performance that felt more like a confession than a concert. No one recognized the piece. It wasn't from any famous composer. It was hers. Julian stood frozen. His arms, once folded in smug dismissal, now hung loosely at his sides. He didn't understand it. How could someone dressed in thrift store clothes produce something so divine? His mind raced. "This has to be a trick," he muttered. But the expressions on the faces around him told a different story. Some had tears running down their cheeks. Even the wealthy patrons in their diamond necklaces sat in stunned silence, holding their breath with every trembling note. And then came the high note, so piercing, so pure, it felt like time cracked open and revealed something sacred. When she finally stopped playing, the room didn't applaud immediately. It was too soon, too sacred. And then, like a wave breaking, thunderous applause erupted. People stood. Some shouted. Others cried. Julian didn't move. For the first time in his life, applause felt like punishment. He hadn't played, yet the audience had given their hearts to a stranger. A poor, unknown woman with an old violin and a secret past. Who was she? After the performance, Cameras tried to follow her, but she disappeared into the night. The only clue she left behind was a name engraved faintly on the side of her case: Evelyn Morel. Julian couldn't sleep that night. The melody haunted him. It wasn't just the music, it was the pain behind it. It was too familiar, like something he'd once known, but forced himself to forget. The next morning, he searched her name online. Nothing came up. No concert history. No articles. No photos. Just a single blurry image in an archive from nearly 20 years ago. Young violinist wins regional symphony competition. Evelyn Morel, age 17. 17? Julian's fingers trembled as he clicked the article. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. It was her. The same eyes, the same hands, and standing next to her in the picture, him. A teenage Julian, holding second place. The headline hadn't mentioned his name, only hers. He stared at it, stunned. How had he forgotten? She had been the one who beat him, the one who made him cry backstage, the one his mother told him to forget. You'll be rich, Julian, she had said. She'll disappear into poverty. People like her never go far. And that's exactly what he believed, until now. But if Evelyn had disappeared from the music world, where had she gone? And what had happened to the prodigy who once made young Julian feel small? He had to find her. That afternoon, Julian called his assistant. Cancel everything, he said. Every show, every interview. I need to find someone. And when I do, I'll make sure the world hears her music again. But the world wasn't going to make that easy. Evelyn wasn't just hard to find. She didn't want to be found. Still, Julian had money. He had influence. He had connections. He thought that would be enough. It wasn't. Before we dive deeper into this journey, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. For weeks, Julian searched. He sent private investigators, contacted old conservatories, and even offered a reward $100,000 to anyone who could locate Evelyn Morel. And yet, nothing. No records. No address. No known relatives. It was as if the woman who once outshone him had vanished entirely from the world of the living, only to reappear that one night, with a violin and a melody that refused to leave his mind. Julian wasn't used to being ignored. Not as a world-famous millionaire. Not as a man whose name opened doors and silenced rooms. But Evelyn? She was something else. An unsolved chord still vibrating inside him. Unable to move forward, he visited the old janitor from the concert hall, the one who first recognized Evelyn. The man was slow to speak, but his eyes held weight. She used to play here a long time ago. Came in after hours. Played when no one was listening. Said music didn't belong to the rich. Said it was her only way to talk to the world. Julian leaned in, desperate. Do you know where she went? The janitor nodded slowly. Try St. Agnes, the shelter near Lexington. She taught some of the kids there, but only at night. Julian had never been to a shelter. He'd driven past them, of course, from behind tinted glass in luxury cars. But stepping inside was another story. The air smelled of age and dampness. Kids ran barefoot, and laughter echoed through cracked walls. He stood awkwardly in his cashmere coat, clutching a donation envelope, $5,000 in crisp bills. A woman at the front desk looked him up and down. You lost. Julian shook his head. I'm looking for Evelyn Morel. The woman froze. Why? I need to speak with her. It's important. She hesitated, then nodded toward a small room at the end of the hallway. If she's here, she'll be playing. Julian approached quietly. Through the slightly open door, he heard it again. That sound, the same aching melody from the concert. He peeked in. There she was, sitting on a folding chair, surrounded by 5 or 6 children, all holding battered violins. She wasn't teaching scales. She was teaching feeling, telling them to play their sadness, their joy, their dreams. When the song ended, Julian stepped in. The children stared. Evelyn didn't. He shouldn't be here, she said calmly, without turning. I had to come. You already made your point the other night. No, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't come to mock you. I came to apologize. I came to listen. She looked up, finally meeting his eyes. You're not used to being humbled, are you? He swallowed. No, there was a long pause. She stood, gently setting her violin down. "Why now, Julian? After all these years?" "Because I forgot you," he said. "And now I can't forget you again." Her expression softened, just slightly, but her voice was firm. "This place doesn't need your guilt. These kids don't need your shame." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a check. "This isn't for them," he said. "It's for you. To make an album. To bring your music back. The world needs to hear it." She shook her head. "The world had its chance. It chose wealth over art. I chose silence." Julian lowered the check. "Then let me do something different. Let me invest in silence. In whatever you choose to make. No strings attached." For a moment, neither of them spoke. A child tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Miss Eve, are you still going to play?" She smiled, then looked at Julian. "Stay if you want, but this time don't speak." And so, the millionaire sat cross-legged on the floor next to barefoot children, listening to music that didn't need a stage. Julian returned to the shelter the next night, and the one after that. He didn't bring cameras. He didn't post about it on social media. He just came, sometimes with pastries, sometimes with sheet music, but mostly with silence. And slowly, Evelyn began to accept his presence, not as a gesture of pity, but as an offering of humility. The children came to love him in their own unfiltered way. One girl named Lila would often pull at his sleeve and say, "Play with us, rich man." Julian laughed the first time, then asked Evelyn for a violin. The notes he played were clumsy. The kids giggled. And yet, there was something freeing about failing in front of him. Weeks passed, then months, and something unexpected began to take shape. Evelyn started composing again. At first, it was just a few scribbled notes, then a full page, then entire songs, handwritten with ink smudges and coffee stains. Julian watched in awe. He saw how music poured from her, not for fame, not for applause, but like breathing. "You don't know what it's like," she told him one night, "to have your talent buried because the world sees you as disposable." He nodded. "No, but I'm starting to understand." Julian, once defined by his fortune, began using his money differently. He didn't announce it, but behind the scenes, he renovated the shelter's practice rooms, replaced broken instruments, and paid for private lessons for the most passionate students. But the biggest change came quietly. He sold his $1 million violin. The music world was shocked. "Why would a maestro sell such a treasure?" reporters asked. He gave no answer. The truth? He used the money to fund something Evelyn had only whispered about, a music school, hidden inside the city's poorest neighborhood, free for anyone with heart. Evelyn didn't want her name on the building, but Julian insisted on a compromise. They called it the Morel House, but not everyone celebrated the change. Julian's sponsors began to pull away. The elite didn't like this new version of him, the one who refused exclusive galas and luxury endorsements. "You're wasting your brand," his agent warned. Julian simply replied, "Then let it be wasted." During the opening ceremony of the Morel House, Evelyn played one of her original compositions. The room was filled not with billionaires, but with single mothers, street musicians, and children holding violins with shaky hands. And in the very last row, Julian sat beside the janitor who first recognized Evelyn. "Told you she used to play," the man whispered. Julian smiled. She never stopped. The world just stopped listening. That night, after everyone had gone home, Evelyn and Julian sat under the bare street lamp outside school. No music, just the soft hum of the city. "Why did you really come looking for me, Julian?" she asked. He paused. "Because I needed to remember what music felt like before I turned it into a product." Evelyn looked up at the stars. "And now," he smiled, "now I just want to help others feel it too." She nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You know, wealth isn't just about money. It's about what you build that outlives you." Julian looked at the school, its windows glowing with the soft light of late-night practice. "Then maybe I'm finally rich in the right way." Just as they stood to leave, a soft melody drifted from inside. One of the kids had stayed late, still playing. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Now that," she said softly, "is real fortune." The next few months became a quiet revolution. Word of the Morel House began spreading, not because of flashy marketing or celebrity endorsements, but because of the sound. Soulful and perfect, deeply human music poured out of its windows into the neighborhood. People walking by stopped to listen. Soon, local newspapers picked up the story. Millionaire turns his back on fame to fund hidden music school. But still, Julian avoided the spotlight. Every interview request was turned down. Every invitation declined. "This isn't about me," he told Evelyn. "It's about giving people what I almost destroyed in you." Evelyn herself had changed too. The guarded woman who once hid behind silence now stood proudly at the front of a crowded classroom, conducting with her whole heart. She no longer feared recognition. Her compositions, once scribbled in private notebooks, began to find life in student performances, echoing across community centers and small local theaters. Julian secretly began recording her sessions with her permission and compiled them into a self-published album titled Unheard. It wasn't sold. It was gifted to every student, teacher, and dreamer who had ever felt unseen. The impact was immediate. People began writing letters to the Morel House. Some were from former musicians who had given up, others from kids who dreamed of owning an instrument one day. One stood out, a handwritten note from a blind boy in Detroit. "I can't see your school, but I heard the music. It made me feel like I was running." Julian read it aloud to Evelyn one evening. She sat in silence afterward, then quietly said, "That's why we do this." One day, a young reporter managed to slip into the school. He caught Julian tuning a child's violin and recognized him. "Mr. Crane," he said breathlessly, "is this your legacy project? Are you building an empire of compassion?" Julian laughed gently. "No, empires fall. This is a home." When asked why he never put his name on anything, Julian looked toward the practice room. "Because the world already knows my name. It's time they remember hers." A week later, the reporter's article went viral. "The violinist who humbled the millionaire." It told Evelyn's story with dignity and truth, focusing on her years of silence, her refusal to surrender to shame, and the music that could never be bought. The article ended with a line that stuck in the minds of thousands. "Real wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's by what you give away with open hands." Evelyn was invited to perform at the State Art Summit. She declined. Instead, she sent 3 of her youngest students, children who had never been on a stage before. They performed her Peace Windows, a slow, haunting song inspired by nights when Evelyn played alone behind locked doors. The performance brought the audience to tears. And for the first time in the summit's history, the standing ovation wasn't for a famous name. It was for the unheard. Back in school, Julian watched the live stream alone. When the children bowed, his eyes welled up. He turned to Evelyn, who had just walked in. "They did it," he whispered. She smiled. "No, you did it." But he shook his head. "No, you kept playing, even when the world went quiet." Evelyn sat beside him. "So what now, Julian? What does a millionaire do after giving away his fortune?" Julian chuckled. "Start over. Maybe this time I'll invest in stories, not stock. Hearts, not headlines." She looked at him, eyes warm. "Then you finally understand." The music school had no golden plaques, no marble statues. But every day, its halls echoed with sound richer than any symphony Julian had ever played. A fortune made not of dollars, but of dreams. As the years passed, the Morel House became more than a school. It became a symbol, not of charity, but of second chances, of humility, of how one simple act, one woman picking up a forgotten violin, could unravel a life built on ego and rebuild it with grace. Julian Crane, once the millionaire adored by elites, now spent his days teaching children how to hold a bow and hear their own hearts in the music. Gone were the roaring stadiums, the flashing lights, the million-dollar stages. And he didn't miss them, not even for a second. He had found something wealth could never buy: peace. Evelyn, too, transformed. She began holding community concerts with her students, not to impress, but to connect. Families came in droves. Neighbors who had never spoken began to talk. The concerts weren't perfect. Sometimes strings broke or kids forgot their cues. But no one cared. What mattered was the honesty. The music didn't ask to be flawless. It asked to be felt. And that made all the difference. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the school echoed with the fading hum of rehearsals, Evelyn stood alone in the old practice room where she had first taught the children. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, remembering the first night Julian had walked in. clumsy and clueless, holding guilt instead of a violin. She smiled. People change, even the proud, especially the proud. Julian joined her moments later, his sleeves rolled up, paint still drying on his hands. He'd been helping a few students redecorate the art room. "There's something I want to show you," he said softly. He led her down a hallway she rarely visited. At the end was a new door, wooden hand-carved, with no name on it. He pushed it open. Inside was a small recording studio, cozy, warm. The walls were lined with soundproofing made from recycled wood. A grand microphone stood in the center. "For your music," Julian said, "so it can live forever. So even when we're gone, they'll still hear you." Evelyn didn't speak for a moment. Her hand trembled as she touched the mic. "Julian, this is too much." He shook his head. "No, this is just right. I took too much from the world. This is giving it back." That night, Evelyn recorded her first piece, alone in the booth, with only the soft red glow of the recording light for company. She played. No script, no rehearsal, just her heart poured into strings. Julian listened from outside, tears falling freely. This, he thought, was what music was meant to be. Not product, not prestige, just truth. The recording was uploaded under a simple name, For those who were silenced. It went viral within days. But this time, Evelyn didn't hide. She smiled when she saw the comments. Messages from mothers, from failed musicians, from children across the world. "Your song gave me hope." I cried without knowing why. I picked up my violin again. Julian watched quietly as Evelyn became, once more, the name people remembered, not for tragedy, but for triumph. One morning, as they opened the school gates, a boy approached them, skinny, nervous, clutching a crumpled letter and a tiny, cracked violin. He handed Julian the note. It read, "I have no money, but I have a song inside me. Can I come in?" Julian knelt and looked the boy in the eye. "Yes," he said gently. "You're already home." And with that, the legacy continued, not in gold, but in melody. Years later, when people told the story of Evelyn Morel and Julian Crane, they didn't talk about wealth or awards. They spoke of the violin. That violin, the old, scarred one with worn wood and frayed strings. The one Evelyn carried like a part of her soul. It was never put in a museum. It never sat behind glass. It stayed in her hands. And every child who passed through the Morel house got to touch it, to hear its voice, and to add their story to its echo. Julian never returned to the concert stage. The public begged. Promoters offered millions. One even proposed a world tour titled The Maestro Returns. But he politely declined every offer. "I've already had the applause," he said once during a community interview. "Now I want to listen to others receive theirs." The audience didn't miss him. They had found something more powerful than fame. Authenticity. Evelyn's music reached beyond borders. The recordings she made in that tiny studio traveled to war zones, refugee camps, rural schools, and inner-city neighborhoods. Not through Spotify charts or billboard ads, but through whispers. A teacher in Brazil played her song during a storm to calm children. A father in India hummed it while feeding his newborn. A retired nurse in Ireland listened to it each night before bed, saying it reminded her that even pain has a purpose. Evelyn never charged a cent. She said music was born free and should stay that way. And then came the day Evelyn couldn't play anymore. Her hands, once so precise and powerful, began to tremble. Doctors called it early onset nerve degeneration, a slow goodbye. But Evelyn didn't cry. She simply smiled and said, "Then it's time they play for me." The students, hundreds of them now, many grown, many traveling back just for her, gathered in the courtyard of the Morel house. They held their violins high. Some were gifted, some still learning. But all of them carried a piece of Evelyn's soul. They played her first song, the one she wrote in silence, the one Julian had heard on that unforgettable night. The sound filled the city. People leaned out of windows. Cars stopped. Even birds seemed to pause. Evelyn listened, her eyes full of tears and joy. "This," she whispered to Julian, "is what I was meant to build." Julian stayed at her side through it all. He had nothing left of his old life, Not the mansion, not the titles, not the wealth. And yet, he had never felt richer. He'd built his fortune twice. The first time in currency, the second in purpose. After Evelyn passed, the world mourned, but not in silence. Across cities and towns, people picked up violins, some old, some new, and played. Not to grieve, but to celebrate. To honor a woman who taught the world that even the unheard can change everything. Julian remained at the Morel house. He walked the halls she once filled, telling stories to new students. He showed them her violin, let them hold it, and reminded them, "This changed me more than money ever could." And one day a young girl asked, "Will I ever be great like Miss Evelyn?" Julian smiled gently and said, "If you play what's in your heart, you already are." So the music lived on, not behind velvet curtains or in golden halls, but in playgrounds, alleys, living rooms, and crowded shelters. In the hands of the overlooked, in the dreams of the broken, in the courage of those who dare to pick up an instrument and say, "Listen to me." Because one night, a rich man laughed at a simple woman, and then she picked up the violin, and the world changed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.